Hey, welcome to another one of my info vids. This one's going to be on the Hoover mods. There's a lot of stuff you can say about the Hoover mods. I'm going to break this one up into a whole bunch of little pieces. Today I just wanted to start just kind of a general, there's the blog. This is the page that most people look at when they go and check out what Hoover's doing as far as the Hoover mods go. And we've got a Type 1 oiling system, a couple of descriptions, whatever. It's pretty thorough, pretty good. If you do want to do this thing and you want more than just a few pictures, there are a couple of videos out there that are okay, show you how to do it. But that's not what my videos generally are about. I like to go into a little bit of more of an in-depth type thing. I wanted to start today with, let's see if I can find it. Starts right there. And we read, it says, to make matters worse, the oil to the heads gets there via the cam followers, but only when that particular valve is actually in effect. The VW cam followers act as a valve, shutting off the oil to the heads for approximately 92% of the time. So this is one of his foundational reasons for doing the Hoover mod. He's basically saying the Volkswagen engineers were a bunch of idiots. Clearly they were shutting off too much of the friggin' oil. They should not have been doing this, and he wants to override what the engineers have done. So let's take a look at that 92%. Okay, so over here at the Samba, I've put together a little posting. Addresses the issue that I'm talking about here, the 92/8%. We come down into my pile of stuff here, and I've got a calculation that after I don't know, like a couple of weeks of people looking at it, nobody's been able to refute it. So if you go in here and you want to look at it, this calculation is effectively correct. It's not been refuted, not been picked apart. The only thing anybody said bad was that how dare I poke at Bob Hoover. It's like, I'm sorry, but if you want me to do your mod, you better be able to explain your mod properly, and you better not have made mistakes. Because I'm not going to implement your stuff if your stuff has the potential to break my motor. So he's got a little screw up. It doesn't mean that the Hoover mod doesn't work. It just means that one of the problems that he was trying to address with the Hoover mod is actually not that big a problem. So I want to look at it for just a little tiny bit here. All right, so over there at the Samba, I've got kind of a baseline. I don't always provide my entire computations to the Samba. So I oftentimes reserve a little bit of additional stuff for my YouTube channel, and now it's going to be the case today. This is essentially what you saw there, only I have included an angle 120 cam to go with the stock cam. And when you come down here, you've got, that's the degree of a stock cam, 250. This is an angle 120, 290. If you look at when the oil can and cannot flow, right in this area, below a half lift and below a half lift, you can't flow oil. The accelerations force the oil to run backwards. So if you take out half of the lift, not half the lift, half of the duration from 720 degrees, you end up with this number, 573, or that number, 595. Now, over there in the Samba, I said that the stock cam was 17% of the time it sends oil. If you do the computation assuming that you can only send oil when oil can be sent, that number turns into 20%. And for something like a high performance angle 120, you're up to about 24%. Keep in mind that these numbers are conservative. If you look at the numbers that are listed right there, I only credit this one. But there's a transition between the two of these, which means that this one actually extends a little bit out to both sides. So you actually pick up a few more degrees. So this might actually be 21 degrees. This one might actually be 25 degrees. Now, one of the things that Hoover doesn't mention in his blog is that, generally speaking, you want to lubricate stuff when it's actually moving. And the lifters and the push rods, the rocker arms, sit on the base circle of the cam for a fairly decent amount of time. So that's almost 2/3 of the time it sits doing nothing. Now, Hoover didn't tell you that. 2/3 of the time it does nothing, so if it's doing nothing, do I really need to put oil in there? And according to the Volkswagen engineers, the answer is no. Now that doesn't mean that oil won't flow into the system. See, there's something called capillary action. If if you get the oil into the system and you've got a tiny little crack for the oil to try and squeeze through, capillary action will pull the oil into the crack. That's all you need during the time that it's not actually doing something. So now if you go and you look at it, and we assume that we only need to put oil in when you've actually running the system and it's actually doing something, both of these numbers turn out to be about 48 degrees. This one 48%. Now if you add the extra little tiny bit that you get from the overlaps of these 0 and 1 numbers in here, this ends up being 50% of the time. This is a highly engineered system from true automotive engineers, and Bob Hoover broke it. But let's take the 48%. Now that 48% represents 250 degrees half the time. Fantastic. But we know that it won't operate during this area and this area, which means it actually puts oil into the system up here only when it can, and the rest of the time it's on the base circle. It doesn't actually need to put oil in. So in fact, the Volkswagen system puts oil into the system 100% of the time when it's actually needed. So he was so far off base with this that it just blows my mind. What's amazing to me is that people will quote him. They close their mind to the fact that they can actually think about stuff, but they don't. It's so much easier to just quote somebody else. I have faith that Bob Hoover did this right, so I will just quote him. And I'm going to insert right now a little quote from like the very top video that shows up on YouTube. Okay, there it is. And this is the one that I want to look at, which is Hoover Mod right here.
And that's about 8% of the time. So 92% of the time you have no oil going through that push rod.
Do you understand what I mean about just parroting what somebody else has spewed without actually demonstrating that you understand what you're doing? All right, so anyway, getting back to this thing right here, here's what's interesting. 100% of the time that it's moving and that can actually receive oil, it gets oil. Not 8% of the time. It's not off 92% and on 8. It's on 100% of the time when it needs to be getting oil. Now, this isn't the end of the picture. I have an entire pile of stuff involving oil pressures. Because as I mentioned earlier, the push rod, as it bounces up and down, develops negative pressure to send stuff backwards, and it develops positive pressure to send stuff into the joint. If you evaluate those pressures, other issues with the Hoover mod show up. Yeah, I think that's enough for this particular piece of the discussion.